Today I have for you a Zur the Enchanter Esper control deck. So this is not a deck that many people have seen before. I know that I just recently stumbled upon it after hearing about it from a friend. So it is a rogue deck. Zur the Enchanter, it's a card that people overlook pretty easily, but it's not, even though this deck is rogue, that doesn't mean that it can't contend with some of the top tier decks in Modern, which hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate. So it's got a lot of cards that you see in other Modern decks. The mana base is pretty straightforward. You would expect to see fetch lands, shock lands, some basics. That should be standard at this point for any 3-color deck in Modern, essentially, that's a control deck. Now, there's a couple one-ofs that I like to point out, and one of them is the Ijanjo Castle. So this is a Champions of Kamigawa rare land, prevents 2 damage to a legendary creature, and as you can see, there's a couple of legendary creatures in the deck. Both Geist and Zur the Enchanter are legendary, and so is Jace, Vryn's Prodigy. So there's also 3 Creeping Tar Pits as the man land of choice. Going with that over Celestial Colonnade because blue and black are more of a priority. You also see another blue and black land here in River of Tears, and a lot of 1-mana black spells. So discard is universally a powerful effect. These 1-mana discard spells, we're seeing them played in Death Shadow, to Abzan, to what have you. Now you're seeing it here. 4 Inquisition of Kozilek, 3 Thoughtseize, Fatal Push as well, 4 copies. I like it a little bit more than Path, just because there's not that many creatures that are converted mana cost 4 or more in the format. So with that being said, you don't really want to be giving your opponent a land if you can avoid it. But sometimes you'll see a big creature show up that can't be Fatal Push, so you definitely want some amount of paths. So there's a 4-2 split. Then there's 3 Jace Vryn's Prodigies. So we can flashback discard spells or removal spells with Jace, but it also just loots through your deck. So there's going to be matchups where you draw a card that, especially in this deck, that you may just not be able to use. It may be a dead card completely in the matchup. And so being able to loot it away can be extremely important. 1 counterspell in the main deck. It's a negate. 2 Snapcaster Mages, similar to Jace, in that you can flashback some of these 1-mana spells. So it's Snapcaster in this deck, it's basically a 3-mana creature most of the time, because you're mostly flashing back the 1-mana cards with it. And then Spreading Seas, we've seen it be good as just a value card, and Merfolk comes to mind. It's a card that plays it in the main deck, but decks with non-basic lands are on the rise. We see a lot of Tron right now. Spreading Seas is a versatile card. It's good. And you can also search for it with Zur the Enchanter. So that's the bonus and the reason why we have a couple here. Geist of Saint Trapt is one of the primary win conditions. So this deck it can just transform into an aggressive strategy once you go turn 3 Geist, attack you for 6, attack you for 6. It's a pretty quick clock. So Geist allows you to transition from being the control deck to going on the offensive. 1 Detention Sphere. This is a very versatile removal spell. So sometimes your opponent will have multiple cards of the same name. Then Detention Sphere is great. It's basically a Maelstrom Pulse effect that's an enchantment. You can also search for it with Zur the Enchanter. Steel of the Godhead, we see both Geist and Zur are blue and white creatures. So we're able to throw that on one of our legendary creatures, specifically the Geist, because it already has hexproof, is the best one. And then that +2/+2 lifelink and the unblockability that you get from the Steel of the Godhead, pretty great. You can search for it with Zur once again, because any enchantment that's 3 mana cost has 3 mana costs or less, you can search for with Zur. So we go to one of, you'll see a trend here, 1 copy of Ghostly Prison. So against those small creature decks, this is the perfect card to stall the ground, and it can be a big deal. And then 4 copies of Lingering Souls. We're all familiar with Lingering Souls at this point. One of the best mid-range cards in Modern. It mixes well with discard and removal, because it's so hard to actually answer Lingering Souls, because you're essentially coming with 4 different spirits, and it's not a card that you can easily answer on a 1-for-1 basis. So Zur the Enchanter, it's a 4 mana 1/4 flying. Alright, may not seem that impressive as far as the stats, but then when you attack with it, you can search your library for any enchantment, 3 mana cost or less, and then just immediately put it onto the battlefield. Just like that. Straight onto the battlefield. So we've got a mix of enchantments that we can search for with it. So this is the main deck. It actually tops out with Zur. So even though it is a controlling deck, you see that the mana cost of the actual cards is still relatively low. Moving on to the sideboard, Ancestral Vision comes in the grindier mid-range matchups. Rest in Peace, we should know what that's for. There are graveyard decks still in the format. Seen plenty of Dredge still doing well, by the way. So this deck also has utility against Abzan, Grixis, decks that have Delve spells. Stony Silence. We've got one more negate, so 1 main, 1 sideboard. Just a versatile counterspell. There's a lot of counters that could go in this spot. Dispel, Mana Leak. Lots of different, even Countersquall could go in this slot. But going ahead and going with negate for the mana efficiency, and that's the choice here. 2 copies of Timely Reinforcements, so this is good against any sort of burn deck, aggressive deck. Having access to lifelink is key. So, and a lot of times, even if your opponent does have something like a Skullcrack or an Atarka's Command, you can use a discard spell to get rid of that card, and then set up the Timely Reinforcements. Then we've got 2 copies of Engineered Explosives. We're seeing this all over modern sideboards now. It's a versatile removal spell. Normally you play it for 1 or 2. Sometimes it goes up to 3. And it just gets rid of that annoying permanent that your opponent has played. 3 Leyline of Sanctities. Primarily for other decks with discard, but you'll see it randomly coming in some other spots as well. So this is the list, and I'm excited to showcase the deck.